Welcome to Strain on the Game, the podcast that reveals what it really takes to keep elite footballers performing at the highest level. I'm Stephen Warnock, former Premier League player, joined by physical performance expert Adrian Lamb. From training ground truths to the financial impact of fitness, we discuss the often overlooked challenges behind the beautiful game. Welcome to another episode of Strain on the Game. We're just 3 games into the Premier League season and injuries are already rewriting the script. Arsenal are without Saka, Chelsea without Palmer, big names are missing, managers are scrambling, and squad depth is already being tested. With the transfer window slamming shut on Monday night, will Liverpool's record-breaking transfer Alexander Isak get thrown straight into action? Lammy, let's get into it. Are you shaking your head anyway? But first of all...
We'll come to that later, I think.
Yeah, how are you, mate? You well?
I'm really good, mate. I'm really good, yeah. Busy week, international week, but I bumped into an old player of mine, Paddy McNair, who I was
Okay, lovely.
I was with at Sunderland. He's now playing for San Diego. He was in town in Los Angeles. He played LAFC on Sunday night, so
Class.
got round for a coffee. So I'm fully expecting to get a phone call from him in 2 weeks to invite me to do a podcast with him, judging
Brilliant.
on the former players that come to Los Angeles in recent history. Obviously, I'm contractually obliged to say no. But how are you, mate? How's your week? How's your week going?
It's good. It was great until this morning when I decided I was going for a run. So my mate said to me yesterday, why don't you do 5K a day in September? And I thought, yeah, go on, I'll do that. So I put my running gear on, and as I walked into the bathroom, I looked in the mirror and I went, oh my God, I look so chubby round here. So I thought, I'm going to have to jump on the weighing scales. Now, bearing in mind, I used to weigh like 77.8 kilograms at me peak when I was playing in the Premier League. I jumped on the weighing scales this morning. I was 87 kilograms.
You're joking.
I was like,
Seriously.
no, unacceptable. I mean, I've been eating great. Well, I've been eating rubbish, but eating great, if you know what I mean. So,
yeah, the other side of great. Very enjoyable, but not great.
Yeah, so I've been for I've done my 5K run. I'm going to the gym later on, and I'm also doing another 5K to catch up on the one that I didn't do yesterday. I'm on a health kick, mate.
Yeah, but don't go from 0 to 100 miles an hour and then...
I've got to, because I've got to get the bug.
All right.
I've got to get the bug.
Yeah.
So,
what are you changing anything in and around your nutrition? Because, you know...
Well, I had a couple of chocolate raisins before. I can't just jump off I can't fall off. I've got to wean myself off slowly.
You can't outrun a bad diet. You can't
Correct.
outrun a bad diet.
I know.
All right. If only
we'll see.
If only you had a knowledgeable fitness coach who could help you navigate this process.
Or a podcast to listen to about it all.
Oh, yeah, perhaps that might be a more reliable source.
Right, should we get into it? Should we have a chat about what is going on? So we're 3 games into the Premier League season and they are dropping like flies already.
What's going on? I mean, we were having this conversation 6 weeks earlier than we thought we were going to have it. You know, we did have this sort of loose structure around, and we thought we'll talk about injuries probably in and around the middle of October, which would coincide with one of the reports that I lean on quite heavily is produced by Howdens, which is an insurance company. And every year for the past 4 years, this will be the 5th year, they've released figures about the financial cost of injuries in terms of wages that are paid to players who are unavailable through injury, which we'll talk about later on today. But so with that report being published in the middle of October, we thought that would be a nice time to talk about where we are. But then the last 3 weeks happened, and honestly, at times it's looked like a reenactment of the first day of the Battle of the Somme from World War I. I'm looking at and I'm thinking, what is going on? It's almost, if it wasn't so serious, it would almost be comical. Like every time somebody's sprinting, I'm kind of looking through my hands going, please don't do a hamstring.
Yeah.
And it's it's just incredible that we're talking about this. The fact that teams are now getting to the first international break, breathing a sigh of relief and thinking we've got a chance now to clean out the physio room a little bit
Yeah,
is remarkable
yeah,
because I mean you know what it's like and that's it's a sinking feeling where you in in the medical room or in the sports science office or in the generally the physios and the sports scientists and the fitness coaches are either sharing an office or the office is next door to each other, and you'll have a board with all of the players' current statuses on it,
yeah,
and there'll be a big list of players who are available, fully fit, ready to go, and then there'll be a list underneath that of players that we need to monitor and maybe modify training loads because there might be some underlying issue or they might be coming back from in the early part of their return to training after they've been injured. And then there's a list at the bottom of injured players.
yeah.
And then, there might be two or three on that. And then you come in on the Monday morning after a weekend and suddenly that list has jumped to 7 players.
It's quite scary, isn't it? It
Yeah,
is. I mean, the big thing for me when I was looking at it over the weekend and after the games that have just finished over the weekend, so I've got like a list of players here, and Arsenal have lost Bukayo Saka, who's arguably their most important player. Then
yeah,
they've got Saliba out. Havertz is out for a long period of time with a knee injury.
yeah,
Then they've got Ben White, Jesus, and Norgard out. Chelsea have got Cole Palmer missing, who is arguably their most influential player. Aston Villa have lost their two midfielders in Anana and Camara, so
yeah.
they're really struggling.
Both hamstring.
Spurs, yeah, Spurs have lost Kulusevski, and Madison's obviously done his ACL. Then
Yeah,
Manchester United at the weekend lose Cunha, who's their big name signing. So all the teams at the moment are losing arguably their best players. Everton have lost Branthwaite, who's arguably one of their best players, if not their best player.
yeah.
So there's a real effect that it's going to have on the Premier League season after 3 games.
Yeah, and there's and the effects. There's multiple effects. I mean, as we sit here, I had a brief look through. There's a number of websites available that viewers and listeners to this podcast are welcome to look at themselves. Premierinjuries.com and athletegameslost.com and the Premier League website itself details the players that are unavailable through injury. So as we sit here today, after 3 games in the Premier League, there's over 70 players
Right.
unavailable through injury. Now, a number of those, when I look at the website, those aren't all injuries that have happened this year. There's like Jesus from Arsenal was
Yeah,
one
there's
that happened.
hangovers from last
Yeah, of
year.
course. You have these particularly ACL injuries, the long term injuries, and a number of them. But I think I counted 19 muscle injuries, and we talk about muscle injuries being preventable, or certainly you can reduce the risk of them happening. Listen, you can't the term injury prevention is is the wrong term for me. You can't prevent injuries from happening, especially with the intensities and the speeds that we're playing at in the Premier League. The injuries are going to happen, but the magnitude of them happening, the rate at which they're happening, the amount that we're seeing
Yeah.
is there's clearly something wrong.
So when we look at it now, I was going through the list as well, looking at it, and obviously you shared it with me, and we're trying to do our research, looking into things. So the three common injuries that are striking me at the moment are knee injuries, hamstring injuries, and groin injuries. So if we start with probably the least common, which is the groin injury, uh,
Yeah.
why are they picking up so many groin injuries? Is it a change in preseason and the way they're going about things? What is it?
Yeah, I think all of them are related to the change in pre-season. We spoke in our series that we talked about the long-term effect that pre-season tours will have, and the fact that fitness coaches, physios, technical coaches are not able to get the work with the players. The time isn't available for the fitness coaches to work with the players to make sure that they're resilient and robust, and that these injuries, the likelihood of these injuries happening, is reduced. Yeah, that's the underlying factor here. I'm convinced of it. Specifically looking at groin injuries, there are different mechanisms for groin injuries. The two most common ones are change of direction at speed, um, or ball striking is the other one, because the mechanism of the groin injury, generally speaking, is when it usually happens in the adductor longus, when the muscle is extended and there's a load goes through it. That is when it's at its most vulnerable position. So if we look at Joe Linton, another one we haven't mentioned, the mechanism of injury there was he was overstretching for a ball. So his groin was on a stretch. He then took contact from the player who was challenging for the ball, and the load that went through the muscle obviously caused it to fail effectively. So yeah, groin injuries they're tricky. They're
Is that an element of fatigue when he picks that injury up, or is that just because of the preseason and not being able to do enough work in it, or how?
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to pinpoint an exact cause. I think that the injuries are caused by multiple different factors, and the difficulty is you can't trace it down to one particular thing. It's not like, a murder mystery drama where everybody gets in the room and you say, "And you did it," and it's point the finger at this and point the finger at that. There are lots of different factors which can contribute to an injury happening.
Yeah.
It's about managing those risk factors and reducing those risk factors. And I'm going to sound like a bit of a broken record throughout this podcast today. If you're a fitness coach, first of all, the players need to have the time available to them at the end of the season to rest and recover from the strains of the season that's just gone. Because, and we talked about mental recovery, physical recovery. Then they've got that off-season program, which generally is about redressing imbalances in the player's physical status. So if you've got the weak hamstrings, that's when you start to work them. Then you've got your pre-season, which is when you do your general preparation, in which a lot of injury prevention work happens with physiotherapists and with strength and conditioning coaches for the first 2 weeks. And then you go into your specific preparation, which is when the practice games happen and we start building up the game minutes, and then we're into the season. And that doesn't happen anymore
So
nowadays.
when you look at the preseason, then is there an element where the balls come out too early, and there should be a baseline of, because if you think about it, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you go straight into training the first couple of days and you get the balls out.
Yeah,
You haven't been moving football movements for such a long time. You're
yeah.
doing a lot of straight line running, and suddenly it's like you've got to build that momentum up, and you've got to build your muscles up to be able to move in football movements. Because I mean, that just seems very logical to me.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing for me was always, that we did bring the balls out on day one, but we would do the dribble tracks, if you remember, so it's
Yeah, yeah.
controlled. So the first initial few training sessions through pre-season are highly prescriptive in terms of numbers of accelerations, numbers of decelerations, number of turns. So we're exposing, still talking about groin injuries here, we're exposing the adductor muscles to those changes of direction, but we're controlling the intensity of them, and we're controlling the number of them and the angle of the turn and what the body position going into the turn. It's all highly prescriptive, and it's controlled. When we bring the balls out if teams will bring the balls out very, very early in pre-season, because players respond very well to it. And I think if they're not conditioned to that, we haven't, and we're exposing players to that unpredictability associated with small-sided games, because generally they are small-sided games and possessions in pre-season. That element of chaos, that element where if you get a bad touch, a player's going to come in and smash you. You're not going to get a fitness coach coming in and smashing a player who's taken a bad touch, although I've been tempted once or twice. So and it's that process of gradual exposure to controlled elements, and at a certain point when we're confident as coaches that they've got the robustness and the resilience to be able to cope with the unpredictability and the contact element, which is a massive one,
Yeah,
and that the other thing is the rest recovery ratios. We're going to work for this, and then you get 30 seconds rest, and then we're going to work for this, and you get 30 seconds rest. We can say we're going to have a small-sided game, we're going to play for 6 minutes, and then you get 2 minutes rest between each game, but within that 6 minutes you might do nothing or you might do everything. You might be in those periods of maximal intensity where the ball's just coming to you all the time, the next ball's coming to you, and the next ball's coming to you. So we can't control that. Now, we do need to, of course, we need to train that way because that's real and that's
yeah,
that's going to take your fitness into. We can't just do the run, and we'll sort of get onto this when we're talking about Isak and the other players, because it's not just Isak who haven't been involved in team training and now are going into they've got their move, or in some instances haven't got their move and now they're back into the team training element. Well, how do you integrate those players into the team? There's a different type of pressure there. They're coming from a different level of conditioning. They've got a very high level of general conditioning because most of them will have been working one-on-one with a fitness coach, but
yeah,
they haven't been exposed to that team training, that unpredictability, that chaos, that element of where you need to react. They haven't had that. Everything's probably been very prescribed. So
yeah.
that's another thread to this conversation.
Yeah, and when we look at the hamstring injury, I'm looking now thinking, obviously the game's about this high press. It's about intensity. It's about the amount of sprints that you can do in a game, and the game is stat driven that
Yeah,
everyone wants to get in and go. Well, I've done this amount of runs and I've done this, and
yeah.
that's what you asked me to do. That's what you asked me to cover. The one player I want to really touch on is, and you talk about this quite a lot when you talk about football, being fit for a system
Yeah,
and being fit to play in a certain way. And I'm talking about Mateus Cunha at Manchester
yeah,
United. So he's gone from being almost a maverick of a player at Wolves, where he can almost rest when he wants to, because people go, well, he's going to win us a game or he's going to score an important goal. And there's an element where players and managers will go, we can accept that. We can allow that to happen in a game. But now he's gone to Man United, there's a different pressure. There's a pressure of, now you've got to show what you can really do out of possession as well as in possession. And I've watched United's first couple of games very closely. The Arsenal game, I was at the Fulham game when they were away from home, and he looked like a completely different player out of possession, and he's being asked to
mhm,
do something that he's not used to. And 3 games in, lo and behold, hamstring pops.
yeah. I mean, I'd talk about that. When one of the biggest indicators of that is when we look at predictors of injury or mechanisms of injury, or that injury environment, and we look at the research. Um, when a manager changes midway through the season, you watch the number of hamstring injuries go up. Because players are adapted to a certain way of training and a certain way of playing, and there are very specific physical demands attached to that. I call it the head coach will give you a tactical job description. When we're in possession, I want you to do this. When we're out of possession, I want us to do this. Well, good managers should. Not every manager does. Just go and play. Just
Yeah,
you
yeah,
figure it out. When I have an understanding of what the tactical job description is, I overlay that with a physical job description. So if you're being asked to do this, what does that mean? So if you're a fullback, the manager wants to play with a diamond in midfield, and he wants to get the midfielders quite narrow, and he wants the fullbacks to get forward, deliver crossing the box, but they've also got a defensive duty. Then by and large, I know they need to be capable of doing 1,200 meters of high speed running,
yeah,
and they need to be able to tolerate that, without blowing a hamstring out. So, so when we have that specificity, I use that to illustrate the point, because it's the same thing when players move to different clubs from one system to another. They are adapted to a certain way of playing and a certain way of training as well.
yeah,
And when that changes, unless you manage that change very carefully in terms of the load that you're exposing these players to. And this is sometimes a friction point between coaches and fitness coaches, where one of the tools that we use, if you want to call it that, is called the acute chronic workload ratio. So what we'll do is I'll look at Stephen Warnock and I'll see what his workload in the previous 4 weeks looked like, an average. So we'll talk about it in terms of high speed running. So let's say you do an average of 1,000 meters of high speed running through the week.
Yeah.
Now, according to this acute chronic model, you can be exposed to 120% of that load
In a
without
day.
significant risk of injury. So I know from that, your target for this week will be 1,200 meters of high speed running.
Yeah.
If we get into the 14 and the 1,500 meters of high speed running, then our risk of injury increases. I'm not saying you will get injured, but the risk increases.
Got
So
you.
that's one of the tools that we can use to monitor workload and physical outputs and integrate new players into teams if we have the data of what they've been doing in the previous 4 weeks. But that's somewhere where we can somewhat safely integrate players up through pre-season so
Yeah.
that on day one of the season they're ready to go and the risk of injury is lower.
Well, it's interesting because if you look at Jeremy Frimpong at Liverpool, Arne Slot said he was advised by the bench to take him off in the game when he got injured at Anfield. And it was a case against Bournemouth, wasn't it, where he came off?
Yeah.
And he was actually injured. He'd already sort of had a slight pull on his hamstring.
Mm.
Um, and if he hadn't have taken him off then, they'd have lost him for a longer period of time. So the
Yeah.
physios, the analysts, the sports scientists behind the scenes were like, it's time to get him off.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show how much of the game is being looked at on that side of it. Because there'd have been an element where Frimpong would have been like, I don't need to come off. I'm feeling fine. I'm okay. But
Yeah.
little does he know, those tight hamstrings are actually one's already damaged. And that's an issue that you're going to have moving forward. So I think it's there's a great side of sports science that you can use that side of it and you can prevent injury longer term. But obviously you've got to get out at the right time. But I just wanted to touch on something where when I was at Blackburn, and I'm not just saying it because you're on, but I was a flying machine. I was the fittest I'd ever been because we were trained in a certain way. And then I went to Aston Villa. Martin O'Neill was manager, and the fitness coach never worked with us. It was all just five-a-side based training. And I always remember thinking, where's the fitness element?
Mm.
Where is this fitness element? And it only ever came in when we got beat. It was like, oh, you're not fit enough. But when it was questioned, and I remember the players one time saying, we're not fit enough. We're gonna blow up. And we blew up in April
Yeah.
because of not being fit enough at the start of the season. And it was like, well, do you want me to hold your hand? Is that what you want me to do? And I was like, oh my God, like that's your job as a club and as a team of staff to put that together for you to
Yeah.
make sure that you're fitter. We never got it.
Yeah.
And I blew up in around about December, January time, and
Yeah.
I just couldn't get myself fit. Now, it was just a difficult period because you're trying to motivate yourself to do your own training, but you shouldn't have to. That should
Well,
be a
that's
team collective and everyone doing
yeah,
individual bit but put on for you.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, and that's when we've talked before, haven't we, about that collaborative nature of integrated training, where that you get your fitness through the football, and if you don't hit those particular targets, and the GPS has been a revelation to us as fitness coaches when I first started working with probably 2008, and I think there is a difficulty when we have that computer says no. I think we perhaps need to look at the data a little bit differently. I think the data should be backing up what we see as practitioners rather than purely making decisions based on data. But yeah, I mean that's certainly a thing where we can prescribe very specific training targets for each player, and we will have different training objectives through the week. One day we might look at, right, we're going to focus on overloading accelerations and decelerations, so we keep the training pitch. If it's a small-sided game, the pitch is very small, so there's lots of ball contacts and lots of 5-meter sprints, 10-meter sprints, get up to the ball, get up to the ball, get up to the ball, we're going to focus. The next day, right, we've done that. We're going to focus on high-speed running. So we extend the pitch and we change the dimensions of the pitch. We do different drills. And I've seen things with Liverpool, 'cause Liverpool seem to release quite a lot through their media team in terms of training, where Arnie Slot will have a drill in which there's a counter-attack, probably a wave, and then once that cross is gone in, his expectation is that everybody's sprinting back to the halfway line and getting back into position early. And
Yeah.
that high intensity running component is really, really important to the way that they want to play, which is, just a snapshot of Arnie Slot's way. But just going back to the Frimpong one, I wanted to ask you as a player, and this is an important one, really. Did you ever have those situations where you felt something that you're not really sure about? That could be God, no, a calf, not a
Yeah.
calf,
Wouldn't be a
not
calf
with
with
you,
me, mate.
or a hamstring or a groin or whatever it might be. And you sort of, that feels a bit different. I'm not sure what that is. Maybe I should come off. Maybe I shouldn't come off. I don't want to come off. All of what goes through your mind as a player. I don't want to let the team down by giving a goal away if I am injured, but I'm not sure I'm injured. Should I? And then the coach might think I'm a softie.
Yeah,
Do you know
that's
what I mean?
that's the worry.
What goes through your mind as a player? Because this is something that I've never experienced.
Yeah, I think there's different ways of looking at it, but obviously that is one of the things. You don't want to let your team down, but you don't want to have a period out the game. And the other thing is as well, you don't want to come off and then it's nothing, because then what's the manager thinking about you? What are the staff thinking about you? If you're coming off, you're getting dragged off, and because you can't
Yeah,
walk. That was always my feeling anyway. But I think there's an element of you become quite selfish within it, where you think, I'll just get through it and I'll be fine. But you're only thinking about that game, if that makes sense. You're
yeah,
not thinking of 2, 3 games down the line and thinking, now it's different if there's an FA Cup final coming up or there's a big game coming up and you're
yeah,
thinking, I'm not taking any chances here. I want to be fit for next week. But when it's just Premier League or game after game, you just get on with it and you just deal with it. And then if you're out, that's part and parcel of it. But you want to stay on the pitch and want to make sure that you're fit. I mean, I had a situation where when I got injured at Villa against Blackburn, I needed an ankle operation, and I just thought, I'll get through it. I'll be
yeah,
fine. I'll tape it up. And I broke down every 2 months, but then I'd think, can I be bothered having an operation? Because it'd wipe me out for 6 months. Well, if I got back after 2 months, I could play for 2 months and then I might be out on them for another month, but then I get back again. And I just got caught in a vicious cycle of it. Now that's
yeah,
different because that was a long-term injury, but I should have just got the operation done there and then and gone, right, it's an issue. I need to deal with it. And ultimately, that was the decline of my career, because I could never power off my foot. I could
yeah,
never get that strength. Whereas if someone had just grabbed me and said, listen, you're not performing and it's 'cause of your ankle, I'd have gone, right, I'm getting it done. But it was always an element of, well, we need you back on the pitch.
yeah,
So you're just gonna have to get through it and deal with it. And then you know what it's like as well. You want your summer off and you go, I'll just take my summer off. It'll recover over that period. It's never the same. Sometimes you do need an operation to fix things, and that's the
yeah.
way it was.
So ultimately, you felt that probably cost you, didn't it, in the long term?
Massively,
Yeah.
massively, it cost me. Yeah. I still regret it to the day. It's the biggest regret of my career, not having that ankle operation.
From a staffing point of view, those are always difficult conversations to have.
Of course. Yeah.
Hard truths. You know, to go to a player and say, "Who am I to say you're not performing?" But we can back it up with evidence and data, and we can
Absolutely. Yeah.
look at all
Yeah.
that.
But
And
I think deep down, as a player. So if you came to me and said, listen, you're not at your best at the moment, and we think it's because of your ankle injury, I'd be pissed off at you, and I'd probably tell you to do one. I'd be
yeah,
telling you to fuck off. I'd be like, no chance. I'm not having that.
you
But
told me that every day. That wouldn't have been any different.
all right, well, I should have said it then. But if you'd have said that to me, I'd have gone away and thought about it and thought, well, hang about. It's someone I've worked with for a number of years. He's noticing something in me, in a decline in me. He's not going to put me on the treatment table for no reason.
Yeah,
you want me out there as much as anything. Well, I'd hope you would anyway, but you'd be
100%.
like, why would you do that to me? Because you're seeing something that you've got to protect long term, and that is ultimately your job. So I felt like, yeah, if someone had have come to me and said that, I'd have got the operation.
Yeah, yeah, and also there's a thing with the head coach and the manager because their jobs are on the line, aren't they?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Where they're looking at, well, I'd rather have a 75%, 80% Stephen Warnock than 100% somebody else, and
yeah,
that's a
yeah,
different type of pressure when you'll be all right for Saturday, won't you?
yeah,
That
yeah.
one, you know,
Very.
when you're on the treatment table and the gaffer comes in, taps you on the leg, "You'll be all right for Saturday, won't you?" "Yeah, yeah, yeah, no problem."
Yeah.
It's a tough
So
one.
right, we'll have to get into the numbers here, and obviously the cost of losing players before we move on to the transfer
Well,
window. So
there's two ways of looking at this. There's two costs. There's the performance cost and the financial cost.
yeah,
So, as the one I care about is the performance cost, you know, and then and I rely a little bit on studies. So, do you want to get into that one
yeah,
first?
absolutely. Yeah, let's go for that.
Right. So, there's a number of different research articles, and I should say that I've had some messages on social media. Or we've had some messages on social media, um, things that I've referenced, and what we'll do is anything that we talk about in this podcast today, we'll put a link to a research article if viewers or listeners to this podcast want to look at a little bit more detail some of the things that we're talking about. We'll provide those links and
Yeah,
try to
we don't just make this stuff up, do we? Or you
well,
don't anyway.
some of it we do, but you know, for the stuff that we make up, there will be no research articles posted. But for the stuff that isn't made up, no,
Correct.
it's all so. You know, we do. You know, it's all evidence based practice, isn't it? Versus
Yeah,
practice based evidence.
absolutely. Yeah.
2020, there was a study produced which looked at what the performance burden of injuries in the Premier League was. It was a 5-year study. Um, and what they found was that the relationship between injuries and performance was very clear, very clear, and how much it was actually costing teams. So they calculated, and I invite the listeners to look at this research themselves and to make their own judgments about this. I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong. This is what the research told them that 136 player days out cost a team 1 Premier League point.
Okay.
So if you've got 5 players out for 5 days, that's 25 player days out, if you like. So
Yeah,
each
got you.
player, each day out, it accumulates. They calculated that 271 player days out cost each Premier League team 1 place in the table. And they also calculated that, on average, injuries cost Premier League teams 6 places in the table. But everything evens itself out, right? So if this takes a lot of makes a lot of assumptions. So if everybody drops down 6 places, then the table stays the same.
Yeah,
So essentially, if you have a better injury record, then it's going to affect you less.
got you.
Right. These are the average teams drop 6 points. So a good way of looking at it. So just to put that into context, right? Last season in the Premier League, and I got this from premierinjuries.com, there were 593 time loss injuries in the Premier League last year. That equated to 21,451 player days lost and 2,597 games missed, which are astronomical figures.
Well,
Astronomical.
just to put that into context, just say how many players were injured last season again.
There were 593 time loss injuries. So one
Okay.
player might have been injured 2 or 3 times. So
Yeah,
the
but
individual.
also we've just talked earlier on this podcast that we've got 70 injuries already this season.
Yeah.
So it looks like already, if you were to work things out, that'll eclipse that already.
Well, we look at trends, don't we? And we
Yeah.
can't sit here after 3 weeks and say it looks like we're going to have the worst injury his season for injuries in history, but it looks like we're going to have the worst season for injuries in history.
Put your
And
neck
we,
on
you
the
know,
line.
we might be sat here in 6 weeks' time with egg on our face because there's actually no injuries,
Yeah.
and
However, the
but
trend might.
but
Let's go back to it anyway. So go
right.
on. So last season,
In it to kind of put that into more context, we'll look at the team that finished top, Liverpool, and the team that finished second, which was Arsenal.
yeah,
And that was like, how much did injuries cost Arsenal a realistic shot at the title? So Liverpool ranked second best in terms of their injury record. Nottingham Forest, interestingly, were the best. And
and how well did they do?
would you say that Nottingham Forest outperformed compared to what their expectation was at the start of the season last year?
100%. 100% because they had players available week in, week
Yeah.
out, and you had and you had flying machines as well. So yeah, that
So,
stacks up.
so we're starting to get the idea of the relationship between minimizing injuries and having high levels of performance, whatever performance looks like for you. Nottingham
Yeah, yeah,
Forest performance, success for Nottingham Forest looks quite different to success for Arsenal and Liverpool, I would argue. So, they outperformed each other. So Liverpool ranked second. They had 22 time loss injuries. And again, this comes from premierinjuries.com. They had a total of 764 player days lost, which if we look at the study that we just mentioned, where 136 player days out through injury equals 1 league point, that means they underperformed by 5 points based on their injuries. Okay, they lost 5 points to injuries. All right, so massive assumption. I'm not
yeah.
saying that that's what happened. I'm just joining the two studies together. And they had 88 games missed. Arsenal came second. Was it 10 points in the end? I think it was 10 points, wasn't it?
I think it might have been 11, but
10,
yeah,
11 points. Yeah, so it was, it was a healthy number, wasn't it?
yeah.
They won the league by. Arsenal ranked fourth worst in the Premier League for their
Wow,
injury record based on premierinjuries.com. They had 36 injuries to Liverpool's 22. Their player days out was 1,297 to Liverpool's 764. So there's a difference. So that equates on our thing to around about 10 points.
wow.
And they
That
lost
is,
106.
that's very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, and they lost 106. There was 163 games missed through player absence. Liverpool's was 88. So it's
88.
not double, but it's getting up there, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a
So
hell of a lot.
does player injury we're looking at Arsenal because they've got a number of players injured right now, haven't they?
Well, off the top of from my notes here, Saka, Saliba, Havertz, Ben White, Jesus, and Norgard.
And you could half talk about Odegaard because of his shoulder, couldn't you?
Yes, you could.
I know
Yeah.
he went off with his shoulder. It could be a Jude Bellingham one where they manage him through to the end of the season. But if he gets another fall on that shoulder, I don't know what the injury is. We know it's a shoulder, but we don't know the
Yeah, how
extent
severe
of
it
it.
is. Yeah.
He was on the bench, wasn't he, against Liverpool? And
Yeah.
so he's not injured because he's available for selection. But there's something that's
Eating away.
bubbling underneath, isn't
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
So
That's it's very interesting, that, isn't it? As to where the clubs are and what they're doing. Because in comparison at the moment, I'm right in saying that Liverpool have got Frimpong who's injured, but on a whole they're actually okay. So because we're talking about the two favourites again, aren't we, for the title?
yeah. We're
But
talking about
also it's also the players that you lose, isn't it? And how you can't afford to lose your best players. So you're talking about Saka. Saka doing his hamstring it's not a good situation
yeah.
for Arsenal.
Yeah, one of my mantras is the best performing teams are the teams that keep their best performers available for the most amount of time. And we, again, another study. I'm leaning quite heavily on research here to try and paint a picture, but this comes from the NFL. It was a 10-year study looking at injuries in the NFL and the relationship between injuries and performance. And in terms of that particular topic that we're talking about, the teams that performed the best in the NFL were the ones who kept their best offensive, to use an American terminology, and
Yeah.
defensive starters. So the starters are deemed as being the best players. They're they're starting the game. The teams that kept over 10 years, massive study, 10 years, the teams that kept the best offensive and defensive starters were invariably the teams that performed the best in terms of percentage wins. NFL lends itself to more performance metrics because it's a metric based sport.
Yeah.
It's
Stop start.
yards passing, yards rushing. It's whereas proper football, where we actually kick the ball with our feet, it's
Careful. Some of our listeners and viewers might be NFL fans.
don't worry, I live in the States and I say this to play, proper football, proper football. I turn really northern, proper football. I turn into my dad. Phone and catching game, you call it football. NFL, it lends itself, soccer, association football, lends itself, it's less easy because it's more fluid and it's more dynamic, and whereas NFL, so those stats are more stark, if you like. But yeah, percentage playoff appearances, numbers of wins, and then performance metrics in terms of yards gained and yards rushed and passing and all of that. The teams that keep their best performers available are the teams that perform the best.
Yeah.
When you put it in those terms, I think it's common sense.
It
But
is
there's
common sense, but it's not as easy as people make out, is it?
no, it's not. It's not, and there's I think there's two other elements to this in terms of performance. One of them is, at the moment, Arsenal are managing their way through it because they've recruited heavily through the summer,
Yeah.
and Saka goes out, Eze comes in, and they're replacing quality with quality, aren't they? They've got best performers all the way around. But as time goes on, how you spread the load, because there's a lot of games this season to come, and we're missing players so early on. How are we going to spread the load? How are we going to spread the load through the team when we get to these early stages of cup competitions, group stages of Champions League with all the travel? Are we going to get? Are we going to be able to rotate the squad in the way that we want,
Yeah.
or is it going to be the same players who've been pushed out? And then there was, again, this was a study that came from basketball, and basketball's completely different. They play night after night after night after night, so they do rotate their squads. But again, because of injuries, the teams that had player availability and the ability then to rotate the squads performed much higher than those squads that had an injury, a higher injury burden, and were unable to rotate the squad and rotate the players within games in the way that they want. Whether that translates into football, I don't know. It's a study from basketball, but it paints a
Yeah.
picture. It does paint a picture in terms of squad rotation, in terms of allowing players that time. There are times, aren't there, where sometimes we look at players and we say we need to draw him out for a couple of games.
Yeah. So you talked about the performance and how it affects performance in terms of points. Financially, what's it doing to clubs? Very quickly.
Right. So the financial burden is incredible. It's incredible. So the financial burden, I just need to consult my notes here. So when I look at, there's a really good report here it's from Howdens, which is an insurance company, and they produce this European-wide football injury index, is they call it, and they publish it in October. So we don't have last year's figures, we only have the season before figures. And they look at the top 5 leagues in Europe. So Premier League, La Liga, Bundesliga, Ligue 1, and Serie A. So those leagues. In the 2023-24 season, those 5 leagues had a combined 4,123 time loss injuries, which was a 4% increase on the previous season. And in the 4 years that the report has been published, from year 1 to year 4, number of injuries increased 37%. All right, so there's a trend. And one of the things they pointed out in their last report was the number of injuries that young players are getting now, under 21s. And that's really trending upwards, which is a massive concern that young players. So are young players getting overexposed?
Yeah.
Are they are they playing too many games? Are they not getting the rest? You'll cast your mind back to when um the the class of 92 were breaking into that Manchester United team, the way that Sir Alec Ferguson managed them there,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, have a little bit of game, pull them back. Ryan Giggs is one that springs to my mind, and Beckham. They play a little bit, but they weren't thrown in. So that's a worrying trend, if that's the case. But the cost for the 2023 season, 2022-23 season, was calculated at 732.02 million euros, which was a 5% rise on the year before.
Well, I dread to think what next year's report or last season's report's going to be in October.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest number of injuries actually league by league was in the Bundesliga. They had the biggest injury burden, but the financial impact was felt greatest in the Premier
In the
League, because
Premier League
obviously
because pay more.
wages are higher. And this is purely on wages that are paid to players.
Yeah.
And I'll come on to a study in a bit that looks at the financial burden is greater than just wages, because we've talked about points lost. We've
Yeah.
talked potentially winning or not winning leagues, or what's each place in the Premier League worth? 2.2 million, is it?
Yeah, yeah. We'll get into it now then, because we haven't got long to go. So you may
Right.
as well jump into it now, because
Okay. Well,
you've kept the listeners on the edge of the seats there.
So the Howden's report. This is an incredible figure. Over the 4 years that they've been producing that report, through lost wages alone, 2.3 billion euros. Dr. Evil, 2.3
Yeah.
billion euros. And I mean, in lost wages alone, teams are paying players 2.3 billion euros over 4 years that aren't playing. They're not contributing to the team. So cast your mind back to the conversation we had about pre-season tours and how much money pre-season tours are bringing into clubs, and that, like, the commercially driven aspect, and how we're building relationships with these sponsors, and we can do this, and we know that our fans don't just live in the local city; they're in the Far East, in the States, and you can dress it up any way you want. But how much money are these tours actually bringing in? Versus my view of, you're not preparing players to play in the Premier League, because
And it's going to cost you.
And the cost is going to be greater in terms of, you're probably going to have to sack your manager. How much is that going to cost? Because he's underperforming. Did you see? Here's an interesting one. Bayern Munich. So from 2020, not last season, the season before, Bayern Munich had 96 injuries. Bayer Leverkusen won the league again handsomely. Was it 12 points? I think it was.
Yeah, yeah.
Had 36 injuries, I think it was.
Wow.
Okay. So did that cost Bayern Munich the league? Potentially they'd won it for the previous 11 years.
Yeah, yeah.
So they had a much 3 times higher injury burden, player availability, best players available, etc., etc., etc. All the things that we've talked about. Bayer Leverkusen performed really, really well last year. Finished second, didn't they? The last 16 in the Champions League. What's happened to Bayer Leverkusen this year? They've just sacked the manager yesterday. So Ten Hag got sacked yesterday, and that's related back to a conversation we're talking about, that changing manager, that changing style, the physical demands associated with that.
Yeah, I mean, they've sold a lot of the players because they were hugely successful as well, haven't they? We have to point that out. But there are other factors that will come into that as well, and that is a different style, a different understanding, and things like that. It's
So I want to go back to the study when we're talking about the financial costs of the Premier League. the study that calculated what days off through injury cost points wise. They calculated that the total cost average per team was in the Premier League was 45 million. Only 9 million of that was associated with lost wages, rehabilitation costs, because don't forget, the more injuries you've got, the more staff you need to look after them.
Yeah, yeah,
Scans, surgeons, these are big financial things.
yeah, yeah.
But 9 million of that 45 million pounds was lost through player wages. 36 million was lost through prize money, essentially, and lost player. So when we're talking about how much money do these tours cost versus how much money is potentially available, I will not say that Manchester United didn't qualify for the Champions League last season because of injuries, but how much does not qualifying for the Champions League for a team like Manchester United cost them financially?
Yeah, yeah,
Significant amounts of money.
yeah. It's huge
Significant.
amounts, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and we were talking about what if football is being driven by commercial factors and driven by money, let's say it, if football is being driven by money,
well,
then
it is.
where does the true money lie?
Yeah,
And if you want to increase your attractiveness to sponsors and to the commercial side and get more supporters in, you need to be a successful team. Otherwise, supporters will drift away and start looking at other teams
yeah.
over
Well,
time.
there's an issue straight away there where you've got the job justification. So straight away, commercial go, oh, we can bring X amount of money into the club, and you've got, without being disrespectful, a fitness coach going, well, hang about. If I keep my players on the pitch for longer and we're able to do this, that, and the other, we'll actually save the club more money, which will outperform what you're going to bring in commercial revenue, which is quite astounding, isn't it?
And I
That's
and I
just
had
a
that and I had that very conversation with a commercial director at a club that I worked for, and his response was, "Can you guarantee me that we will finish one place higher in the Premier League next season? Because I can guarantee that this money is coming in if we do this in the off season." And
tough.
I've said, "Well, of course I can't. Of course I
No.
can't guarantee that." I
But
should
in
have
the
said,
back of your mind,
it's
you are
it,
thinking, absolutely, we will.
yeah. I mean, it's about, are we creating a performance environment in which we're giving ourselves the best chance to compete with teams in the Premier League? And I would argue that off-season tours are, they're not preparing the players for the rigors and the physical demands of the Premier League, and that is now being manifested in the number of injuries that we're seeing.
Right, we're going to have to get onto it. Transfer deadline closed Monday. It was 7 p.m. And the biggest talking point of the window was Alexander Isak, who ended up moving to Liverpool for a record breaking £125 million from Newcastle to Liverpool. It was the most drawn out saga probably that I've seen over a transfer window. The big question is not whether that he's worth the fee. It's when can Liverpool fans really expect to see the best of him, and also when can they just expect to see him on the pitch?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be careful, haven't you? You've got to be careful with that. I remember when I was at Newcastle United, and this is going back 20 years. Do you remember a player called Albert Luque?
Yeah, yeah, winger.
Yeah, so he's a winger
Yeah, yeah,
striker. I think it was
yeah, yeah.
Morris. Yeah,
More a striker. Yeah, I do remember him now.
yeah, got him from Deportivo, and he came in £9.5 million, which, what do you get for £9.5 million now? But at the time,
Yeah, yeah,
big money. Came in on similar time to now, late August. Season had already started. Window was still open, which is ridiculous, by the way. But I'd like to get your views on that. But let's just finish this story off first.
yeah.
Came in, I think, played the next day. Made his debut. Probably had a 10-minute cameo. I think it was Manchester United he actually played against. So there's welcome to the Premier League. Got injured the next game. Got injured.
Really.
Did his hamstring, bad hamstring injury the next game because he wasn't He wasn't up to speed. He wasn't up to speed. Physically, he was fit. He'd been playing for Deportivo La Coruña, but he wasn't fit for the specific way that we wanted to play. And he was out for 3 months, and then he was on that cycle, which we've seen all too often,
Yeah.
of injured, rehab, pressure to play, train, pressure to play, injured,
Yeah.
treatment,
Goes again.
rehab, train, play, injured. And
So,
he never got going at Newcastle, and that, you know, that you could trace that back to that point. He played in the second game and
of course.
tore his hamstring.
So with Isak though, there's a player here who quite clearly everyone knows hasn't kicked a ball during preseason competitively in a game. I say competitively, but given
Yeah.
game time, he's obviously trained. If you're receiving a player like Isak now, and it's been one of those situations where it's not been a nice situation between Isak and his club,
Mm.
could you ring up and say, can we have his data of what he's done of pre-season, or could they just go, no, we're not interested?
Yeah, well,
Or
there's
would he be working with someone individually?
yeah, I don't know the exact circumstances of his. I mean, he will. I would imagine. Well, the first thing to answer your first question, does the data belong to the club or does the data belong to the player? And there was a big sort of conversation in around that in sort of 2018. We collect all of this data, and data protection is a huge issue in and around players.
Very interesting.
So who owns the data?
Oh, that's
If
why
I'm
you're so good, Lammy. That's why you're so good. Why we
well,
got you on.
I have my moments. I do have my. So essentially, that data should come with that player. You know,
Really?
it should do,
Okay.
yeah. And if he's switched on, can I see my stats for today? Can you
Just keep
you
logging
know,
them.
yeah, and you'd keep logging them, and certainly so you know that you're going to get a move. I would imagine in the circumstances around that move, there was will he or won't he, and Newcastle was sort of keeping him at arm's length from the squad, but I think he was still going into the training ground and he would be working one-on-one with a fitness coach, probably
Yeah.
a technical coach as well, doing a bit of striking work. But he'd probably have a team of 2 or 3 around him because there was always that chance that the move wouldn't happen
Of
and
course,
then we
yeah.
could get him back into the squad. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's almost like we'll keep him ticking over, keep him bubbling under. But it goes back to something that we talked about right at the very beginning of this podcast, which is he's working probably very, very prescriptively with a fitness coach. You know, that element of reaction, you can try and manufacture that in a very sort of artificial way, but it's very difficult to recreate the demands of team training, which he hasn't had.
Yeah.
When you're just working one-on-one, when there's only one player around you. I don't know whether or not he trained with the under-21s or the reserve team, the 23s. I suspect probably not. I think he'd probably just working one-on-one with a small group around him. So what he's missing is that everything's been very controlled in terms of times and distances and speeds and numbers of accelerations,
Yeah.
very much like an off-season program. But he's missing that chaotic unpredictability which comes with team training. You know, you take a bad touch and there's a aggressive left back there waiting to smash you. You know, you're getting the timings of your run, and you made a great point, and you're dead right. Show remarkable insight, which I'm delighted with. You must have been listening when I was working with you as a player. The movements are completely different. You know, those spontaneous movements. You know, in terms of is he running in behind? Is he arcing his run? And then we come back to that second element of this, which is he fit to play the way that Arne Slot wants him to play, and how
Yeah.
long that takes time to adapt. So how do you go around that process? You've got to sort of, if you're trying to minimize the risk of injury,
Yeah.
and it is about paying off risk versus reward. If we do this, what's the worst can happen, but what do we get out of it? And sometimes you do have to play that game a little bit in
I
and
think there's
around.
I think there's an element as well where Liverpool fans will be desperate to see him, so
Yeah.
there'll be that desperate. Where's our player? We've
Yeah.
just signed this massive player. Where is he? there'll be an element where he's thinking, I'm desperate to get going at the football club. I've had a very difficult sort of 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it might be. And he's just looking to, I mean, what people don't understand, and this is very similar when you come back from a long-term injury, adrenaline will carry you so far,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
adrenaline is something that will push you to an injury eventually, won't it? So he's got to be also very cautious of that.
yeah,
But the other side of it, just before you jump in, is you don't want to lose someone for 6 to 8 weeks or longer by putting them in too early because he signed a 6 year contract.
yeah,
So there's actually not that much of a rush because the
yeah,
Premier League season won't be won or lost in the next 4 weeks. Well, it might be, it might not be, but
yeah,
with Liverpool's squad depth, they should be okay. But he's been brought in to push them over the line for the Champions League, which
yeah,
is later
yeah.
on down the line.
I think there's also an element of Liverpool are currently sitting top of the league, of the Premier League table, which um
Yeah,
that
so
that
there's no
gives,
pressure to actually
that
get him
gives
in
you a little,
quickly.
if they'd perhaps drawn that game against Arsenal, and if they were sitting there with 5 points rather than 9, that does change things a little bit. I mean, the short termism which is attached to the decision making of in within Premier League clubs is sometimes, I always try to play the long game, but the short termism is remarkable sometimes. It's like we need him now. And that can change within 24 hours. It can go from, yeah, take your time, we're fine, to we need him now. And that landscape changes very, very quickly. So you have to be prepared for that. They've got time. I think Liverpool have got a fantastic, fantastic medical and performance staff.
Yeah,
Really, really good. Really,
yeah,
I know one or two of the individuals there, and they are fantastic and very, very, very progressive. And their attention to this is usually good. Is excellent, as we saw with the figures that we talked about earlier. Um, he might get a few, because it's the international. We don't know he's away with his international team, but when he comes back, when he comes back from Sweden. That's another thing I'd be a little bit worried about.
well, that was what I wanted to ask you about. Was he's signed for the football club yesterday, and by all intents and purposes, he's on a flight to Sweden last night. Now I know John Tal Thomason did come out, which was a nice sort of understanding of the situation. He said he can't play too much because we know he hasn't played enough football, so we can't run that risk of injury.
Yeah,
However, if you're playing competitive football for Sweden and you're trying to qualify for a World Cup,
yeah.
there's a pressure, and he's
There's
your
a
star
massive
performer.
pressure. Yeah. And that time, that time where the medical staff are saying we need to get him off, and it might be 1-1. Oh, we'll give him another 5 minutes, see if he can nick us a goal.
Yeah,
Look,
yeah, absolutely.
and the medical and performance staff are saying he's run his race,
Yeah,
and now all of a sudden we're in that danger zone, aren't we?
but there's another element as well where the players thinking, and players do naively think this. Well, if I can get through 90 minutes, I'll be getting better. Like getting, I'm almost accelerating that process of getting on when you're actually not, because you, as you always talk about, you're in that buffer zone of potentially picking up an injury,
Yeah,
and you might have picked up an injury in that last 20 minutes that won't actually happen until the training session during the week or the next game. And
yeah.
that's the problem you have.
Basically, it's like that ticking time bomb analogy, isn't it? You've started the time and it's ticking, and the bomb won't go off till probably Thursday, but it's in there unless you manage to defuse the bomb between in that time between the end of the game and the training session, and that's where data can help in doing all of these pre-training assessments, multiple different pre-training assessments to see where we are coming out of the game. I'd be really interested in the level of communication that's currently going on with the performance staff at Liverpool, who don't know the player.
Yeah,
They've
true.
never worked with him. They don't know what he's like as an individual, even. And Sweden, and the player, and the player's representatives, and all of these things that go on around. It's not an easy one, but everybody's on this. It seems to me that everybody's on the same page in terms of what is in the best interests of the player But John Dahl Tomasson's got a job to do for Sweden.
100%.
So,
He absolutely has.
his job and his responsibility is to act in what's the best for Sweden. Now, that may well be the same thing where we give him 30 minutes or we give him 20 minutes or he plays a cameo. We'll look at him in training. Again, exactly. He'll be like, I mean, you as a farmer, right? This is a farmer story. Right? When my dad had the cows in the shed all winter, and then you have a look at these on YouTube when you let them out in spring, and they just go absolutely nuts, running around the field, like jumping over, like it's bedlam, absolute bedlam. There's a little bit when I see a player coming back into training, my mind goes there because I think how happy he is. Look how was he, and then after 6 weeks of that, it's like, oh, not this shit again. He just reverts back to type. Turn the page. Oh, the usual sort of nonsense. Yeah. But, so like I said, they might well arrange some games behind closed doors. It's unlikely that he'll play in the reserve. So, but you're absolutely right, 100%. I would treat it very similar to a player coming back from an injury in terms of we've got to manage it. So that criteria-based reintroduction to competitive football would normally be you play against a lower standard of opposition in the first couple of games, which is usually reserve team football if you're coming back from an injury. Or we might arrange a game behind closed doors if we have the chance, because we have that break before the next Premier League game, which is in 2 weeks' time, then there is an opportunity to do that. So we might get 45 minutes against a team at the training ground, and then he'll probably get 20 minutes, 30 minutes here, 45 minutes, and they'll build him up that way. But he's not the only one, there's Sancho, there's Garnacho, these players. So there's loads of them where they're going to be going in. Now, that Sancho going to Aston Villa, that might be a bit of a different scenario in terms of how they manage him and integrate him into the squad and integrate him into competitive football, because they're underperforming, I would argue, at this stage of the season.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the pressure for him to play is significantly higher than it is for Isak to play at Liverpool. But it's an interesting one. It's one that I've come across a few times in terms of usually, that December transfer window, players come in late. How do we integrate them? How do we manage the expectations of the manager? How do we manage the expectations of the coaching staff?
Yeah.
How do we manage the expectations of the player? And are we all on the same page here, or are we pulling in different directions? It can be a bit of a balancing act, and again, risk versus reward, and how we measure these risks and what we're exposing the players to. It's not an exact science, There's a decision making element to it, which everyone has to be involved in.
Yeah. Right, I think we'll leave it there. I think that's been so interesting from the point of view of players being injured early on in this season, the financial implications that it's having on teams or will have on teams throughout the season. I think this is something that we will come back to, especially when that Howden's report does come back or come out in October. We will review it. We will do another podcast on the findings of last season and see the implications and whether that trend is continuing to rise as well. I think it'll be interesting to come back to how the players have integrated into the teams from the back end of the transfer window and how they've been managed. So that is, again, something we will touch on. But Lammy, absolutely loved it as ever. Great insight, great knowledge. As you said, the information will be there for everyone to look at and to read up on. This has been another episode of Strain on the Game. Please follow at Strain on the Game on social media. We are on YouTube as well. I can't stress enough how important it is for us as a team here to be able to, if you can subscribe, like, and comment, it goes a long way to help this podcast move forward, get more listeners. The more listeners we get, the better quality of guests that we can get on the show. And we have got some cracking guests coming up. We've had great guests on in the past as well. But yeah, thanks for listening to us, and see you soon. Follow us on social media and YouTube at Strain on the Game. Subscribe, like, and follow.